All right, hello everybody. I hope you can hear me. Okay, Mr. Gamstein. So, I just want to go over more of that reading that I handed out to help with the reading part of the GED. I want to go to the next reading on this document. Go through it a little bit. It has a lot of history, which I love, and knowing a lot of the information on here or knowing about it will help you a lot on the reading test of the GED, and it will help you a lot on the social studies test. All right, this section is on the guide, and if you don't have it, I can send it to you again. I sent it to you already. Identifying and creating arguments, the relationship of evidence to main ideas and details. Main ideas and details, knowing, figuring out what's a main idea and a detail are two of the skills that they test you on that we looked at. Okay, and it goes into more detail. Basically, all of this is saying when you read something or you look at a picture or whatever, you know which is the main idea and which is the detail. I want to look at this document. It's a lot of information that they're going to have on there. So let's just talk about the world for a second. This is 1948. What is going on in the world in 1948? So here's a map of the world. So you do want to know, relatively, for these tests and just for your life in general and your kids in the world, what the world looks like. You want to know the continents, in general, where things are. Not everything, but you want to know where you are. I'm in the United States. And where's Michigan? Here it is. This thing is called North America. Here's Central America. Here's South America. Those are three of the continents. I think there's seven. I get confused them sometimes. Oh, where's Europe? Europe is generally here. This you have to know. Is Europe. Hawaii is all the way in the Pacific. This tiny little thing over here. It's my daughter talking. And here's Africa. And the Middle East. In the West, we call it the Middle East. It's not the Middle East if you're from there. I don't know what they call it if you actually live in the Middle East. But over here. Oh, here's where I'm from. Lebanon or Yemen or what, Russia. Look at that. How huge that chunk of land is compared. Yeah. China. Big, big, big places with lots of people. India, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Australia. You want to know that. All right, so in 1948 was a very, very important year in terms of shaping the world we live in. What is going on? Well, we got to go a little before that for a second and talk about what happened before 1948. And what happened was a major, 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 major world war. From 1939, I think I have a little thing here somewhere.
Really?
Yes, in 1939 to 1945, the world was embroiled in a world war, World War II. Means the whole world is involved. Who were the main players in World War II? I wish I could look directly onto the camera here. It bothers me. I can't. It's better. I don't know. I gotta fix this for the future. My head's turned a little. It's okay. Here's the Allied powers and the Axis powers. On the Allied powers was the United Kingdom, Britain, France, the Soviet Union, which now we call Russia, and the United States. The Axis powers were Germany, Nazi Germany. They were the group who was running Germany, Japan, and Italy. Okay, these were the two main groups fighting each other. However, all of these countries were very involved in countries all over the rest of the world. So the fighting was happening everywhere. Okay, this World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history, unfortunately. 70 million people believed to have died in World War II. In addition to people dying from the fighting, horrible things, there was the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews in about 4 or 5 years were rounded up and killed in camps, and against gypsies. I mean, just generally atrocities all over the world. Japan went into China and really did a number on people, right? A lot of suffering, a lot of death, a lot of destruction. 1945, the war is over. The Allied powers win, with the United States coming out as the United States and the Soviet Union coming out as the most powerful countries in the world. We won and we have all the power, basically. And the world becomes divided between the Soviet Union and the United States. And I want to go now to Europe. The main Europe is here, right? We're going to zoom in and just look at it for a minute. Europe itself, the countries we know as Portugal, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, ended up being divided. This half, the western half, Spain and France and Great Britain, were part of the Allies. It was really controlled by the, not controlled, but on the side of the United States. They were the dominant country. To the east here, Poland and the USSR stands for the Soviet Union, and all these little countries here, not little, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, etc. All of this was controlled by the Soviet Union, and even though the Soviet Union fought with the Allies in World War II, they were not friends. And at the end, they said, we're gonna now. We wanted you. I think you want to destroy us, and we over here think you want to destroy us. And they got into a new war. They didn't fight, but they were bent on destroying each other. And that war was called the Cold War. Cold War. Cold as opposed to hot, meaning they didn't really fight. Why didn't they fight? Noah, please stop. Please stop. Why didn't they fight with weapons? They didn't fight with weapons because in 1945, a new weapon of immense magnitude was invented in the United States called the atomic bomb, which the United States used. It dropped on Japan. It's a little tiny island in 1945. It dropped 2 bombs, killing millions of people. And the world realized, wow, we really can't get into a whole world war again because we will destroy each other and the planet. So they didn't fight, but it was called the Cold War. That Cold War really lasted from 1945-ish, really all the way up to about 1990. So the world in 1948 was a world that just came out of the most massive war and horrible destruction the world has ever seen, and the whole world was involved. What did they do? Well, the Western powers, how are you going to try to prevent that from happening again? The Western powers, the U.S., France, the United States, basically, Soviet Union said, well, we're going to create, it was the U.S.'s idea, but whatever, we're going to create a kind of an organization for the whole world to try to make peace with the whole world, and it's going to be called, dun, 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 the United Nations. United Nations. We have that today, and all the members of the world are going to have seats in there, and they're going to vote, and they're going to talk, and we're going to try to avoid war that way. United Nations. All right, so that's the backdrop here to this reading. It's a lot of information. Okay. In 1948, a person named Eleanor Roosevelt, amazing person, gave a speech in 1948 about human rights. Who was Eleanor Roosevelt? Eleanor Roosevelt was the wife of the husband, was the wife of the president of the United States at the time, Franklin D. Roosevelt. And she was an amazing person. Here's what she looks like. Where is she? And, in different parts of her life. And she cared about human rights and all that kind of stuff. And after the war, she really became active in trying to prevent atrocities and make sure people are treated with dignity and respect all over the world. All right, so she gives this speech. In this speech, she lays out what becomes the universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Yeah, we applaud that. And it's important because the human rights, we're talking about things like what we believe human beings have rights to be treated with dignity and fairness, and not to be killed for their political opinions and all these little things like that. Not little things, it's a big thing. And this is the first time in the history of humankind that somebody in some organization tried to apply it to the whole world. Because the world is getting smaller, we're getting more connected. Okay? So let's look at what it says here. A discussion of Eleanor Roosevelt's 1948 speech on human rights. In 1948, during Eleanor Roosevelt's tenure, the time that she was chairman, it's really chairperson, as the chairman of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, she gave a speech. It was called The Struggle for Human Rights. at the Sorbonne in Paris, France, a famous school. She began her speech by informing her audience that her purpose was to talk with them about the preservation of human freedom. Now, hold on, my vegetables in the oven are done. I got to take them out before they burn, and I'm going to pause this. I'll be right back. All right. I hope this is going. I don't know. I think so. Or where were we? Oh, yes. Eleanor Roosevelt. She's making a speech at the United Nations in 1948 on human rights. She began her speech by informing, did I say this? I have no idea. Informing her audience that her purpose was to talk with them about the preservation of human freedom. Throughout the course of her talk, she tackled several topics. She talked about several things, including the Commission's Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Universal means it applies to all over the world. Declare means to state human rights. By the way, where does this come from? Where do these ideas come from? And when we look down, you'll see we looked at some point this term, it was a long time ago, at the Declaration of Independence. It all comes from the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence is very important. It's very important for this test, but it's very important for people to know about. All of these declarations of human rights, what comes from, originates, copies the Declaration, the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Check it out. Anyway, maybe we'll make a video on that. And the difficulties she and the members of the United Nations faced during the drafting process, the writing process. We talked about how difficult it was to write this document. Why? In the speech, the former First Lady is the name of a president's wife, outlined the two components of the International Bill of Rights, two parts. The first part, Roosevelt explained, served as a declaration of the basic human rights that any individual is entitled to, no matter where he or she lives. And we really, not this term, but last time, really talked about that. What is a human right? Do we have a right to education? Do we have a right to healthcare? Do we have a right to life? It's a very interesting conversation to have. The second part, unfinished during the time she spoke, was a covenant. Covenant means an agreement on human rights that would be presented to every nation. It was intended that once ratified, once passed by each nation, the bill would be used as a reference to reshape any national laws that did not conform to the bill's principles. This is like a lot in here. Let me look at it again. In the speech, she said it was very difficult, this is what she's saying in this paragraph, I want to talk to you about how difficult it was to put together this thing called the Declaration of Human Rights, because we all had to talk and agree what should be in there, what should not be in there. And she said the first part of it, the first thing that we tried to do is that we had to figure out what are the basic human rights we all have. We had this conversation, we had a great conversation that day. It was really September or whatever, but about like, do you believe do we have a right to education? I mean, we want education, but is it the government's job? Like, what is it? Rights are things in current political philosophy that we're born with. No, government doesn't give it to you. Government certainly can't take it away. You're born with it. So you're born. So there's disagreements about what those rights actually are. That was one problem. The second part, unfinished during the time she spoke, was how are we gonna present these findings to every nation? Okay, how are we gonna make it like the law of the United Nations? Is each nation gonna ratify it? Some countries won't want to ratify it. How are we gonna do it? At the time of Roosevelt's speech, the bill's declaration had been approved by most of the United Nations member countries. Most of them said, yeah, that's cool. We want that. That sounds really good. However, 4 nations, including the Soviet Union and other Soviet satellite states. Now, what does this mean? So the Soviet Union, when we looked here, this is Russia now, but at that time, where is it? Here, this really, a giant chunk of land from here all the way over here was called the Soviet Union. And they, at the end of the war, their armies were here, and they basically took all these countries. They said, we're going to keep them. So all these countries at the time, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, actually were called satellite states, meaning they sort of revolved around the Soviet Union. The satellite goes around, okay? But they were controlled by the Soviet Union. abstained. However, 4 nations, including the Soviet Union and other Soviet satellite states, abstained, meaning they didn't vote. I'm not getting involved, from a vote of acceptance of the bill. Soviet Union said, nah, we don't really agree, and we're making all the states that we control not agree. Drawing the audience's attention to these nations, Roosevelt described the difficulties in deciding upon universal definition for the bill's conception of democracy. Big words. Hold on, I got to pause, take the vegetables out of the oven. Be right back. Okay, so at the time, we're back. So 4 nations, the Soviet Union, settled, said, no, we don't agree. Roosevelt described the difficulties in deciding upon universal definitions for the bill's conception of democracy. A lot of big words. Let me explain what that means. Universal means every country in the world representatives have to agree to what it what democracy means. What does it mean, democracy? Is it right? Does it mean everyone can vote? Does it mean that a bunch of people vote, but then you have people who vote for them, like we have here? Because it made a difference, because in maybe if you lived in the Soviet Union and people couldn't vote, really, in that way, or they voted for a party, they didn't vote for an individual, or whatever it was, you have a different conception of what democracy is. So that was one problem. 2, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to understand this 100%. You just have to know what she's doing, that she's explaining to the audience of the United Nations that it was difficult to get this document to agree, for everybody to agree on this thing. She drew out the comparison between the United States and the Soviet Union and spoke about the two governments' divergent, it's like opposite, approaches to and uses of power. Oh God, there's so much stuff in this thing. It's so good. You could spend the whole term, a year, just with this and going through everything. And man, citing the media and each country as examples. The media is like the state-run, the television. Who controls it? It's controlled by the government, or it's controlled by private individuals. While stating that the U.S. government did not punish expressions of any political viewpoints in newspapers, Roosevelt suggested that the government in the USSR, that's basically the Soviet Union, would close down any papers that criticized its political philosophy. She said, she spoke in front of the United Nations in 1948, in the United States, people could get on television or go in the newspaper and express any political viewpoint. I love the president. I don't like the president. He's the best. He's the worst, or whatever about any political group. You're not supposed to. Hopefully, you're not. You're not arrested for it. I want to keep it that way. But at that time in the Soviet Union, you couldn't. If you criticized the leaders, you could get thrown in jail. You could be killed, and you were often. Okay. She ended her speech by repeating a call to action from the opening statement of the assembly. The assembly are the group of representatives from each country. Call to action. We got to do something, is what she's saying. Roosevelt passionately encouraged unity, togetherness, from the delegates, the representatives from the countries, and asked that they overwhelmingly approve the Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, there's really a lot. I just want to stop before we look at the question and review for a minute, because packed in this reading, and this is what they do on the test, there's a lot of little things and little skills and little history facts that would be helpful to know. So what we said so far is we're talking about what's going on in 1948. What's the context? What's the background? When Eleanor Roosevelt gave this speech. Who was Eleanor Roosevelt? She was the president's wife at the time in the United States. Amazing woman. What was going on is the world just went through World War II, 1939 to 1945. It was the bloodiest conflict in human history. 70 million people died. There was a Holocaust where about 10 million people were killed in camps in Europe. There was a dropping of the atomic weapons that killed each one killed at least 100,000 people, just one bomb. The world was, right? And they had the Allies, the people who won, the countries, U.S., France, United States, and United Kingdom, they had to rebuild the world, basically, right? The whole world was devastated. So they created this United Nations thing to say, you know what? Let's have an organization that everyone comes to, and we could talk and discuss things instead of just killing each other, called the United Nations. Eleanor Roosevelt in 1948 was on a part of a program to say, you know what? In the United States, we have this idea of human rights, and declaring that these are the rights we stand for. These are the rights. It doesn't always happen, but these are our aspirations. But let's make a statement for the whole world, and let's get the whole world to agree on it. First time in human history this has ever happened. So she had to convince a lot of the delegates to agree. And some of them didn't want to agree. The Soviet Union said, nah, we're going to force people to do what we want them to do because we lost 30 million people in this war, by far more than any of you guys. And we almost got destroyed by the Nazis. So no, thank you. But so she had to try to convince them. So she gives this speech that we just read. Now, right? Now, remember, the skill is we're trying to be, what we're testing on here is the relationship of main ideas to details, right? That's the skill. So look at the question they ask. This is a sample question from the GED people, but what approach? It's not really even about what's going on and all this history that I explained to you, but you do want to know a little bit about that because it helps you understand the whole thing. That's the context. What approach did Eleanor Roosevelt take to encourage acceptance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that did pass? So you really got to read into it. What is she doing? Oh, yeah, she explained two different ways, and there's two different approaches to what democracy is. Why is she doing that? How is it going to make the Soviet Union agree? And the answer is, they give you the answer. She acknowledged the difficulty of convincing different nations to agree on common ideas of democracy and power. You know, it's very shrewd, right? She didn't go, everyone has to agree or I'm going to kill you all, or she didn't say, you know, make people feel guilty. She said first, yeah, it's very difficult. This is a very important technique when people are fighting or groups are fighting, is first you just acknowledge that you want to hear them. When people are heard, they feel like, okay, yeah, that is tough, you know? You want that, and he wants this, and she wants that. That's what she did. She acknowledged them. She heard them. It's like a brilliant woman. Okay, so that